This week, I'm joined in studio by Matt Alderman. Our interview is Francis Dinha, the CEO of OpenVPN. In the security news, Shield X is adding lateral movement prevention in the AWS platform. Tenable is integrating with the Google Cloud Security Command Center. Say that 10 times fast. Capsulate is helping also to integrate with the Google Cloud Security Command Center. And Evident and Okta, not Evident.io, but Evident and Okta have formed a partnership. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi Network Security Solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's VIAVI. Is the fear of a cyber attack keeping you up at night? Are you worried that your business isn't properly protected? Keep your network up to date and secure from vulnerabilities with VSA by Kaseya. Kaseya's VSA patch management module installs, deploys, and updates all of your software from a single console. Kaseya's network antivirus provides real-time updates and ensures maximum security. Start sleeping peacefully all night long. To watch VSA in action, request a demo today by visiting securityweekly.com/Kaseya. That's KASEYA. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It enables security teams to detect risky user activity, investigate incidents in minutes, and effectively respond. Get your free trial at observeit.com/securityweekly. Welcome to episode 134 of Enterprise Security Weekly for April 24th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadoorian, joined by Mr. Matt Alderman here in studio.
Always fun.
Yes, always nice to have you here in studio. John Strand, a couple of announcements. John Strand will be teaching active defense and cyber deception at Black Hat 2019. You can register at blackhat.com/US/19. We've heard from our listeners, and we know that you love our content for the most part, but the amount of content can be overwhelming. So if you go to securityweekly.com/subscribe, excuse me, you can subscribe to our mailing list that is specific to laying the foundation to collect your interest and notify you when content that is in your interest is published. Our interview for today, Francis Dinha, he fled Iraq in the 70s to Sweden, where he earned a bachelor's in physics and electrical engineering and a master's in computer engineering. He was then recruited by a U.S. tech company in the U.S., and after brief stints in the .com industry and with the U.S. State Department, helping build a communications infrastructure in Iraq, he co-founded OpenVPN. Francis, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's nice to have you. I wanted to start by learning about OpenVPN, how the project was created, and your involvement in the early days of OpenVPN.
Well, OpenVPN was initially as an open source project that was started by James Yunan, who is the co-founder of OpenVPN company as well. So I met James in 2005 when he had his project. It was basically something he was doing because he believed in open source. At the same time, he had the passion for solving his own
We are airing next
problem,
segment
which is
with
about
Dave
remote
Kennedy
access
from
and
Binary
security.
Defense. Awesome.
So we basically met, I have a few ideas
Airing
about
next, a
the
segment
cloud
with Dave
at the
Kennedy
time. I mean,
from
the cloud
Biodefense.
was not there, and I had the vision. Okay, everything is going to be eventually moved from the premise to the cloud. That's where the evolution of the network, I was seeing. And so we got together and decided to really team up together. And I formed the company and co-founded this and started the project to build OpenVPN and a much more than just open source, and develop the commercial aspects version of OpenVPN, which is the enterprise edition of OpenVPN. So that's how it got started. I mean, I had basically some business ideas and a model in mind how we're going to use the VPN, because at the time VPN was very much hardware-based product, and James, when he developed this open source software-based, my idea is to take this in more at the level where we can automatically provision and build a system, that's comprised of the software, and build the network through this type of technology rather than really deploying hardware, typically how the VPN is being deployed. So, and one of the things there, hardware was becoming more commodity, and obviously Linux was becoming more of an operating system for the network. So, looking at that on all these layers, we realized, well, there is an opportunity in the marketplace where we can pretty much reinvent the VPN.
Right.
Look at the VPN.
It's interesting, Francis. Most people think of OpenVPN as the open source software, and I have to say I'm really thrilled that it's everywhere now. If I get a Linux laptop, I got packages I can install. If I go to a firewall, it supports it. It's everywhere. And I'm sure the question you get all the time is, well, I can just use the open source version. Why do I have to go buy something commercial? I'm sure you answer this question all the time. So yes. I'm sure it's burning on our listeners' minds. What are the differences between the open source and commercial versions?
Well, the open source, obviously, it's the core aspects of the VPN itself. And one of the reasons why we keep it open source, because it basically provides that level of transparency in terms of security. Because one of the aspects of the security is you have to have transparency, and you have to have an open source code in order to allow the researchers, to allow the experts, the industry experts, to review the code and to make sure if there are any vulnerabilities. So that was one of the fundamental, concept we have. Now, you're absolutely right. I mean, OpenVPN, you can pretty much take the open source and build your own solution, no doubt about that. But in order to build your solution, obviously, you have to have some expertise, and you have to have pretty much some qualified engineers to put it together. Not only from a server, from an infrastructure point of view, but also on the client side. So putting all that package and integrating and providing some level of usability, both at the endpoints for the user, but also from a management perspective, that's really the value of the enterprise. So the enterprise, the value we're adding there, we're adding the management layer, we're adding the UI, we're adding all that usability, and in terms of also the provisioning and the user experience, the management aspects. So that's what the enterprise, and we've been fairly successful at it, because, it doesn't cost very much for a lot of, especially when it comes to small to medium-sized businesses, to basically take our enterprise edition. And the enterprise, remember, it's built on top of the open source. It's built on top of the open source core software. So in terms of the security, basically, we have all the security basically aspects that we have in our open source, the core software as well. So we've been very successful. We've got thousands and thousands of businesses who've deployed our enterprise edition as well. And that's how we basically being able to fund even our open source project, being able to advance it, and being able to make it available in all kind of platform, ranging from Linux to Windows to Mac to Android to iOS and so on.
So kind of like the Red Hat model, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it,
It is.
You have an open source project, but I may not have all the management and distribution capabilities and the centralization. You build a commercial product that leverages your core, but you now provide enterprise features, you provide enterprise support. Now you've got an enterprise product that now you're leveraging the open source, but also making it a lot easier to manage and take care of.
Exactly. I mean, one of the functionality, for instance, how would you integrate with your Active Directory, or if you have LDAP, if you want to do second factor authentications, you want to do the certificate management, the distribution of certificate management, having those level of capability for the administrator to just go and basically having a web-based interface and being able to configure all these things and making it easy. It's a big deal. The other thing is the big deal is really the endpoint, the user, the app itself. So you have to simplify as well when it comes to the app, when you're connecting to the server, and have that level of experience as well.
Francis, what are some of the common deployment methods? Are people mostly using it to protect mobile devices? Is it more about laptops? Is it server-to-server communications? What are some of the common deployments?
There are so many use cases. The most common use case is really for a lot of businesses or enterprise where they want to consolidate everything under the umbrella of VPN. So just give you an example. So you can have a company with multiple locations, multiple offices, and even some of the remote workers, and you have people working from home or maybe from a coffee shop. But at the same time, in terms of their infrastructure, it's so distributed. In terms of you have some data, maybe are stored in the cloud, private cloud, like Amazon, AWS, VPC, virtual private cloud. And then you've got some maybe backup data and backup server sitting on the premise. And then you have basically SaaS. You're using some SaaS services such as, for instance, CRM, Salesforce, or you have Slacks. And what you want to do now, you want to build a corporate network that's a very distributed, a very virtual. So in this case, you want to basically have it as a requirement where you have your employees connecting to your VPN network. You want to do all validation, all verifications, in terms of you have the right certificate, you have the right the device, at the same time have the right credential, and then do second factor authentication. And on top of that, you want to overlay this single sign-on model around this. So I don't have to have a different credential when I'm going to Slack or when I'm going to basically to Salesforce or when I'm connecting to my network, accessing some particular data. At the same time, also, I want to tunnel all the traffic that's coming from all these devices because I want to apply some policies in terms of accessing internet. So when the employees are accessing internet, I want to make sure I want to apply some level of firewall rules, UTM, Unified Threat Management, making sure that I can block the malware. So all of that is aggregating your traffic that's coming from all the devices into a point where I can take care of in terms of the access control, in terms of single sign-on, in terms of filtering and protecting my basically end users from all these malicious attacks. So it's pretty encompassing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That certainly addresses several of the challenges we face today in the enterprise.
I'm curious how the trends to moving to cloud and these really distributed networks now, right? You talk about, on-premise and you talk about the cloud. And one of the challenges I see with the old traditional ways of doing VPNs is you would have all the endpoints come into a central control point, maybe on-prem, and then distributing traffic out. And my concern has always been scalability of that type of approach where you're trying to shove everything into a single, kind of point, right? How does OpenVPN really start to think about the distribution of the network and how the VPNs work in this really highly distributed environment where there may not be any on-premise devices in the future for certain organizations? How does OpenVPN address that to make it really easy to still get some of the advantages of the VPN, the encrypted traffic, and the policy control stuff in this really highly distributed world?
Well, that's a great question. Do you want me to reveal our next generation of VPN? That's what you're trying to.
We stumbled on it.
Yeah.
That is exactly right. So we are reinventing the VPN. That traditionally the way VPN is designed, you pretty much deploy a box, right? It could be an orange color box or whatever, and it's a VPN, and then you have your employee connecting to that VPN, and then you have to open basically ports through the firewalls. And then from there, you want to have access to all kind of services. Well, that doesn't scale. So what we've done is we've broken the VPN as kind of, think of it, you have server, but you have the client. But the server, the way we've designed this is you can actually have multiple servers. And these servers, you can mesh them together, right? In a really kind of virtual network. So don't think about VPN as really a single point. Think of it, a VPN is like a cloud solution. And actually, that's our next generation. Is basically the VPN can not only have this encryption and tunneling and access control, but also the routing. So meaning that you can mesh these routers. So you could have, say, a server is being deployed on your AWS. And then you have another server deployed on your premise. And then you have multiple premises. And now what you do is you aggregate all that together. So you see it as one cloud, one virtual infrastructure. And the matter of fact, we have a solution that right now it's more a self-hosted solution. So you take the VPN server, you host it yourself, right? You host it on the premise, you host it on AWS. And most of the deployment, what we've seen is typically they deploy it on AWS. And then from AWS, basically, everybody connects to AWS for remote access. And from AWS, you do site to site. So you connect site to site to your premise. You connect to other cloud providers such as Azure or Google Cloud. But the self-hosted, basically, you have to deploy it yourself. However, we haven't launched our new product, but our new product is going to be VPN as a service. It's more of a cloud-based solution. So meaning that you really don't have to deploy your own server. What you can do with the cloud VPN solutions that we're going to be launching, by the end of this year, typically exactly you can drop connectors in any points where you have application, or either it's an application server or you have a network or you have AWS, and you can mesh all that together. So it looks like one network. But on top of it, of course, you have access control and how you're going to allow access control and all that. So this is really where we're moving toward. We're moving toward more of a distributed and much more scalable architecture. So really reinventing the VPN, so the VPN truly become virtual and distributed across different network. But from you as a customer, you see it as one cloud that you don't have to worry about, well, how I'm going to set up this site? Do I have to do site to site? How do I provide remote access? How do I build my routing? You don't have to worry about all that, basically. Pretty much this is provided to you. So as an example, we will have POPs in points of presence in US, in Europe, and you can be a company anywhere in the world. And basically you can drop a connectors on your server that's in London, or you can drop a connectors on your AWS VPC, virtual private cloud. And now you can define policy and access control for users. So your user can connect to this cloud VPN and allow them access to anywhere from anywhere in the world. So pretty much that is the architecture. So we're in a way building a more of a distributed, scalable network on top of the internet. So
yeah, and I think that's a really interesting approach, because the research project we used to do at Tenable, right? My big thing was, if I'm trying to connect the internet to the internet, I cannot shove them through one single straw. Right, it just doesn't make sense, because now you're trying to centralize all your connectivity into a central network and then try to get it back to the internet in an efficient way. What you're basically building is a service mesh for VPN, where it's more of I'll simplify. I think of it more as a client-to-client VPN managed through this distributed mesh that allows efficient connectivity from the internet to the internet without creating those kind of single points of failure, which is a really interesting approach to solve this expansion or this elimination that
that's correct.
of the perimeter.
So don't get me wrong. We're not creating exactly peer-to-peer. So what we're doing, we still have the client will be connecting to the server. However, what we are creating there, it's a mesh, very scalable architecture where you can have basically a system that can have multiple tenants. So each tenant basically can operate in a kind of their own isolated network, but it's really an isolated virtual network across the globe. And you can connect to your network, you can connect to your resources, you can connect to your users, and being able to collaborate and communicate very securely across that. So, and the reason why we're not going with peer-to-peer, and I understand there are some peer-to-peer technology, is because you want to have some access control. You want to make sure that the users and these resources are connected to the server, to our infrastructure, so we can apply some access control aspects in terms of providing the level of security and the level of firewall that we need to provide.
Yeah, and I think that's important because the advantage here is the ability to still apply policy through the centralized mesh without the individual point-to-point, but you get some of the same benefits of potentially a point-to-point because of the distribution in the mesh, which is really interesting.
Francis, and a lot of folks are throwing on this term SD-WAN. Is that what does that mean in your opinion? It sounds like what you're designing is much better.
Okay, so software-defined network, wide area network, right? WAN. So the idea there is to make the management layer more in software. I mean, still some of the existing vendors, and I don't blame them. You get two layers. You get the data plane and you get the control and the management plane, right? So the data plane typically right now, when you have a router, when you have a VPN device or appliance, that's really the data plane. That's really what's taking care of all your packet, moving the packet, encrypting the packet. So the idea of the SDN here is to put the management layer more on the cloud. So now I can control things from the software. I can say, okay, I do have an SDN, but now I can control end to end. I can provision things. I can provision side to side. I can do MPLS. I can do all sort of these current technologies, right? I can really manage them from the cloud. So the first, I would say, generation of SDN1 is more taking care of the cloudifying the actual management and control layer. But what we're doing, we're actually cloudifying everything, including the data plane, because the data plane, when it comes to the routing and when it comes to encryptions, it runs in the software. So everything for us, it's really software. And I understand that some of the big companies and incumbent companies, they don't want to break away from that model of the hardware because that's really where their bread and butter is from. I mean, you can't just basically saying, okay, now we're going to throw all this hardware, and now because hardware is commodity and Linux is very ubiquitous, and I can just basically lease server and just basically deploy my software on demand and get my SDN up and running, right? So there are two kind of model there. There's one model is just basically making software-defined network more at the management and control level, but there is also the data plane that has to be moved to that level of software and control, and we have to control it by software. So in our model, basically, when we deploy our software, it's both the data plane and the control plane. So all our nodes, they mesh together, everything, all the packets, they move through our network. Yeah, I mean, they move through internet and eventually end up in our server, but then our server does all the routing, all the meshing, all basically kind of encryption and filtering and all sort of things that you need.
Yeah, because even if you have an SD-WAN, you got to do some VPN. You might throw a CASB on top of that, right? So you're layering solutions on top, where I think this approach potentially has some advantages of not only the distribution, like you said, the control and the data plane layers, but now because you can centralize and manage this mesh in this distributed mesh environment, the ability to apply policy or even a cloud access security broker type of functionality now becomes more integrated into a central solution instead of having 2 or 3 or 4 different solutions trying to do all that as one. That's really advantageous, I think, for some organizations.
Yeah. And the OpenVPN technology, I think, really lends itself to this new model as well.
Absolutely. This is actually our new generation OpenVPN. We have OpenVPN 2 and OpenVPN 3. So the OpenVPN 3, we've just released that in the open source on the client side, but we have the OpenVPN 3 on the server side. We haven't released that completely, but that's where it lends itself to a multi-tenant. The current technology of OpenVPN is a single tenant. What do I mean by single tenant? It means that you take the server, you deploy it on a piece of hardware, right? And it's basically only have single tenant, meaning you have only one customer. I mean a company that will have all their employees and all these devices connected to it. The multi-tenant is different. A multi-tenant, basically, you deploy that software, but you can actually virtualize this, meaning think of it as a VM. Like you have a piece of hardware, but then you have virtual machines that are isolated. So, and this is in the same way. We have virtual machines that actually isolated different tenants and different customers there, that they can operate on their network separately. So we can take advantage of the hardware where we can provision thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tenants.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really, awesome. Because to your point on the VPN vendors and the hardware, I mean, it's hard to replace some of that hardware revenue in their models, which is probably why, they're thinking through aspects of how do they evolve to this environment. Because when it's all in software, you don't have that big hardware component. That's a revenue hit to some of the traditional guys. In your case, it's all software, and really streamlines the cost structures of deploying something like this and the manageability in this distributed environment, and still get some of those additional features and functions that you can now add in. That's really, I like that approach.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah. So Francis, if people want to learn more, they can go to openvpn.net. Is that the open source one or commercial or like?
Well, actually, openvpn.net or openvpn.com will redirect you to openvpn.net. It has everything. I mean, there is a link for community, so you can see all our open source projects and all that. But there's a link also for even a consumer-based product. It's Private Tunnel, and we have for business, for enterprise edition product as well. So that site has all the information. We do have a consumer-based VPN as well there. We offer that to our consumers. So it's a different website, but you can see it in our openvpn.net as well.
That's fantastic.
It's awesome.
Well, Francis, thank you very much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it was awesome information. So with that, we'll take a short break, come back, and talk about the enterprise security news. Stay tuned.